Are you sick of scrolling through Netflix and Hulu searching for movies that are high quality and family friendly? Christian Cinema has thousands of movies available on demand that you can watch anytime, anywhere. When you sign up for a giving membership, a premium offering from Christian Cinema, you can watch 5 free movies every month. Learn more about becoming a giving member at givingcompany.com/giving membership and start watching great movies today. The other side of the road is safe, where we sidestep being bothered and avoid getting involved. But rolling up your sleeves and boldly going where few dare to tread, that's walking through Samaria. Each week on our podcast, we introduce you to the special few who walk in the spirit of the Good Samaritan. On behalf of the Giving Company and your hosts, David Hendrickson and Dan Riveros, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to Walking Through Samaria. I'm your host, Dan Riveros, with my co-host,
David Hendrickson.
What's up, man?
Hey, nice to see you.
Good to see you, man.
We're in the office.
We are.
There's talk of more lockdowns coming.
Is there?
I mean,
really?
we've been talking about COVID for this entire podcast, I think.
Oh my goodness.
But I feel like we're going to be all right.
I like the free
We're
world.
in Georgia. Yeah, we're in Georgia. We'll probably be safe.
Yeah.
How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good, man.
Yeah?
I ate a lot. Family
Good.
time. I was in charge
What's
of some
a
dessert.
Colombian Thanksgiving look like?
Oh, so we're Colombian and American, so we don't even do the turkey. And we're really from Atlanta, so we had wings.
Nice.
Yeah, we had wings with a
poultry.
Colombian soup.
Still poultry.
Colombian soup.
Oh my gosh.
And a bunch of desserts. It was
that
good.
sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Does your family watch football like on Thanksgiving? Is that a thing?
The World Cup.
The World Cup.
The
that
World
one.
Cup.
Yeah.
It's been a good Thanksgiving because of that. We've been entertained.
Is Colombia good?
Colombia's not even in it.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. We're not that good.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
We have our moments. But who do we got today, man?
Hey, I can't believe that we're introducing him for the first time. He should have been on here a long time ago. Mike Bowles, welcome to the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to see you. So, Dan, Mike has been around as long as Giving Company / iDisciple's been around.
Wow.
He worked for Family Christian at the very beginning of iDisciple.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yep.
And has an unbelievable professional story, unbelievable personal story. I really don't know why we haven't had him on sooner. So, Mike, with your permission, I'm going to read your bio
Okay.
for our listeners, and then we're going to dive right in. It's going to be super fun, and we're going to hit everything from college football to outside the country adoptions to all sorts of stuff.
All right. Sounds
ready?
great.
All
Sounds
right.
great.
To our listeners, Mike Bowles is a husband to Karen, a dad of 5, and constantly learning what all that means. Mike worked in Christian retail for 25 years at various levels. His last position was the AVP of Ministry Partnerships at none other than Family Christian, where he advocated for the orphaned and vulnerable children and families. He led efforts for customers to support Family Christian's ministry partners and developed programs with Back2Back Ministries, Children of Fallen Soldiers Relief Fund, Compassion International, iDisciple, Operation Christmas Child, Pray for America, 410 Bridge, and World Vision. He's currently the advancement director at Back2Back Ministries in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he has been for the last 5 years, being responsible for leading the fundraising and marketing teams since April of 2020. Mike serves on Cincinnati Children's Hospital's Psychiatric Patient and Family Advisory Council, and previously on the Ohio Interagency Council on Youth as a parent representative with lived experience. He's passionate about organizational health, encourages vulnerability-based trust, authenticity, and self-awareness in leadership. Mike is also certified by the Table Group as a Working Genius Facilitator. Mike, it is great to have you on the Walking Through Samaria podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
That's a lot of
It's great
stuff.
to be here.
Cincinnati Children's, don't they call it? Isn't there like a shorter, like Cincinnati Kids, or is it just Cincinnati Children's?
No, it's Cincinnati Children's. I think Columbus does something.
Oh,
a
is
little
it
bit
Columbus
shorter.
that maybe does that? I know Toronto's Children's Hospital is called Sick Kids.
Yeah.
You know, that's what they call it. Anyway, you've had probably more experiences there than you would care to have experienced.
sure.
But
For
we'll
sure.
get into that. As I was saying at the beginning, Dan, we're going to just jump right into college athletics. Like, the only reason that I can think that Mike hasn't been on this podcast sooner is because he's an Alabama fan.
Roll Tide.
probably-
Roll Tide.
That's probably the only reason I can think, because honestly, you know, we've said this a few times, but I've known Mike for almost 8 years. Hard to believe.
Yeah.
And I would put him in the Good Samaritan Hall of Fame. His story is incredible. And we do talk a lot about Alabama and Georgia just because that's what we do. But there's obviously a lot more to our relationship and what we know about one another. So let's just kind of ease our way into this, Mike, if you don't mind. Just tell us a little bit. Let's get our listeners familiar with Mike Bowles. What was life like growing up? What's kind of your childhood background? We'll start at the very beginning.
Yeah, at the very beginning, I actually was born in Richmond, Virginia.
All right, the spiders.
Lived there,
spiders.
right? The spiders. I lived there for a year. I then moved to Washington, D.C. My dad was a Secret Service agent. And so he was in the Secret Service for 30 years. We were 4 years inside D.C., where he served on Gerald Ford's vice presidential detail.
Okay.
We then moved to Nashville, Tennessee. We were there for 2 years. And then we moved to Birmingham when I was in 4th grade in 1978. And so he was stationed there until he retired.
Wow.
I think in that time he protected 7 presidents and foreign dignitaries and all that kind of stuff. So I had a really cool dad from the,
super cool.
Right, cool.
So
Super
if you
cool.
live in Birmingham, are you managing like things that happen in the Southeast, or was he still connected to specific political leaders or whoever it might be?
Yeah, so he could run advanced detail. He could run detail itself with a president or a dignitary or people running for president.
Okay.
But primarily responsibility, at least at that time, I'm really not sure what the Secret Service does anymore, was protection.
Okay.
And then it was counterfeit money
Okay.
and credit card fraud.
Oh, wow.
And so plenty of that was taking place inside of Alabama.
Gotcha. Unreal. So Birmingham is kind of where you consider
That's where I grew
growing
up.
up.
It's where I grew up. Yeah.
Wow. That is awesome. Well, I'm assuming that that's kind of how this Roll Tide thing, made itself into your sports fandom kind of process. But give us a little bit, because we have to talk about your love for the Tide and how that all happened. So,
I mean, I obviously I grew up in Alabama, and
so that's one thing.
That's one thing, right? I was around when Bear Bryant was still there. At church, we had a guy that was a tight end on one of those national championship teams at 78, 79 that we'd play basketball with all the time.
Yeah,
and so I just as I grew up,
drank the water.
I drank, not only drank the water, but I moved away. Didn't appreciate things so much, and then when I moved to Michigan, obviously, Alabama meant more to me.
Yeah.
And then I just dove right in.
You have to take a stand.
I dove right in, right?
Yeah.
And currently, not only in Michigan, but currently I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's Ohio State country.
State fans, yeah.
And so I wear something Alabama almost every day.
Nice. Just to rep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And make a claim. That's outstanding. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, as our listeners probably now know, Dan, you've been here at the company longer than I have, so you certainly know the way that Giving Company has gotten to know Mike Bowles was because of your time at Family Christian. And unfortunately, I guess is probably what we should say, certainly for the people. I know innovation probably has a lot to do with it as well, but Christian retail is largely a category that doesn't exist, doesn't really exist anymore. There's a few independent bookstores. There's maybe still Mardell chains and a couple other smaller chains. But boy, back in the day, Christian retail was a huge thing.
Right.
And this is where your career, really kind of grew and blossomed, and you advanced and probably got some of your leadership principles.
Right.
Talk a little bit about what Christian retail was like then, and kind of how you how would you describe and maybe categorize your Family Christian experience specifically?
Yeah. So I think back, all the way back to when I started in Christian retail. I actually had just finished Samford University in Birmingham. Yeah. And was going to go out to seminary in Fort Worth. And so I went out there, and while I was there, I actually worked for a Christian bookstore called Joshua's Christian Stores.
That's right. Yeah.
Had 56 stores around the country, really primarily in the Southeast. And I did that part-time. I then met my wife out there, got married within about 9 months, was moving back to go to Beeson Divinity School at Samford University.
Okay.
And I got a call from a guy here in the Southeast, actually was stationed here in Atlanta, the regional manager and offered me a store in Birmingham. And so
right out of the gate, you're managing a store.
So I was managing a store, and then I was really taking my major was in religion.
Okay.
My minor was in accounting
or
business. And this was really
seems logical. Yeah.
It was really putting the two together.
Yeah. Awesome. And so talk about Joshua to family.
Yeah. So then with about a year and a half, I had moved from store manager to actually becoming a regional manager for Joshua's. And that was in 95. And then in 1998, Family Christian came and bought all the stores.
Poof. You're now working for family.
Now working for family.
Yeah.
So I became a district manager for Family Christian, managed multiple areas, including half of Atlanta. There was another gentleman that managed North Atlanta. I managed South Atlanta all the way down to Albany and Pensacola and that territory. And then in 2002, I went into the home office. They were looking for a director of operations services. And so I went into the office in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Rapids, Michigan, where it all starts, Dan.
Everything
comes out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's
why on earth I ever moved to Michigan to start with? I tell you, they lure you up in the summertime, and it's beautiful. For sure. Like summer lasts like 3 days.
Yeah. And then there's a bait and switch, and you're shoveling your driveway.
Oh, my goodness. So we moved in July, and then, I was up there in July. I said yes. We moved in October. We packed up from Birmingham, and we drove up. It was 94 degrees here. By the time we got there, it was like 40.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And we said, oh, my goodness.
What did we do?
What did we do?
Yeah.
I saw more snow that winter than literally, I'm not kidding, I had seen in my entire life put together.
Wow.
And then I was like, oh, I'm not sure this was a great idea.
Yeah. And what year was this?
This was 2002.
Okay.
But we were there for 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why I imagine like massive waterfalls. I have no idea where I
Michigan?
got them. Yeah,
Michigan
equals
waterfalls?
Grand Rapids.
Oh,
it just sounds
it
just sounds like Snow White in like water.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of ice, lots of snow.
I mean, Grand Rapids is the home of Zondervan, which gave birth to Family Christian. I think it was called Zondervan Stores, right, at the very beginning, and then ultimately, and then it split off of the publishing business. Of course, Zondervan was bought by HarperCollins. I mean, it's just all sorts of
lots
things.
of transition.
Bethany's still in Grand Rapids.
Yeah,
it's a couple other folks. Hillsdale College, I guess, is close to Grand Rapids.
I think it's in Michigan, right?
So anyway, wild.
It's crazy.
So when you and I got to know each other, I mean, you were doing really meaningful work, which was you were working with World Vision and kind of World Vision's presence within Family Christian stores, which was an incredibly successful venture for them, where customers of Family Christian would actually sponsor kids,
right?
As they came into the stores, almost like you would do if you went to a concert or went to church or, whatever. And then the owners of Family Christian at a certain time were the same owners of this company called iDisciple, which is now Giving Company, which is who I work for. Yeah. And you represented that program as well. And I remember before Family went into bankruptcy and ultimately liquidation, those were the two most successful programs that Family was running.
We had at the moment, right?
When this is me talking, you obviously have way more experience in Christian retail than I do, and mine was indirect. Mine was as a vendor of Family Christian. Family Christian was a customer. But it seemed to me that really good ministry happened, even though we call it Christian retail, right? You buy things, things get sold. It's a commercial entity. It was a private equity owned company before it became nonprofit. How would you kind of describe what you saw happen in Christian retail and maybe, a few things that maybe led to sort of the decline of Christian retail?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big, broad piece there, right? I think a lot of ministry is taking place
great ministry
inside the store with our customers, as well as the process of, look, how do we broaden that around the world? And we created this thing, actually, a guy named Dave Brown. He was the CEO, used to be CEO of LensCrafters, was the CEO of Family Christian. Okay. And he created this thing called the James Fund. And the James Fund was really about James 1:27 to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And during that time, really before things really went downhill for multiple reasons, the James Fund would send our employees on mission trips, and sent 1,600 employees on mission trips. Didn't have to take vacation, didn't have to, they got paid while they were there. It was incredible. And that's really one of the first things I went on.
Yeah, very cool. So we're going to talk about that because I'm assuming that was how you got connected with Back2Back, which is where you are now. But a little bit more on Christian retail, because I think this question is going to pop up again in 10 or 15 minutes for reasons that you know very well. But like, I would venture to say that most of the employees of Family, most of the employees of Lifeway would say this was a bad thing that happened. Good ministry was going on at Lifeway stores around the country. Good ministry was going on. Good missional work was going on at Family Christian stores around the country. And within, 15 months of one another, those two major chains are both
gone,
liquidated, gone, never to be seen or heard from again in a retail setting. How do you process that, right? As a believer, and you were frankly an employee and at a very high executive level within Family Christian, good ministry is happening, and in a matter of moments, those entities are gone. How do we deal with that as believers and followers of Christ?
Wow, that's really hard. I think about a lot of the employees that were there, and a lot of the reactions that they had, a lot of the hurt and the pain. But I also think about, like, there were, at one point, 2,000 of us, 3,000 of us that really got to learn how to do ministry and learn about ministry and learn about James 1:27. That just got deployed all over the country.
Right.
And so that's how I chose to look at it.
Yeah.
Even though it was difficult. But I think the trend in, the trend in Christian retail was coming for a long time.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, from mid-2000s on, just a constant decline.
Kind of decline.
Yeah, for sure.
And, the reality is there's lots of industries that have a life cycle, that ultimately ends in decline. Blockbuster, compact discs.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? We can go through all sorts of watches, right? I mean, there's just lots of categories. And you're going to be a better source of this perspective than I am, but it seems to me that incredible experience, incredible ministry, but following Christ doesn't necessarily guarantee a worldly outcome. Right? Like the best outcome that we would maybe look at through a secular lens, or even, maybe even a faithful lens. But that following Jesus doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be rosy.
Really?
Right?
Are you sure?
I would think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
From a retail perspective anyway.
Retail perspective, or really any perspective at that point.
Yeah,
but
that's cool. Well, you encountered Back2Back at Family.
I did.
And we should do a shout out to Beth Guckenberger, Dan, who's been on the Walking Through Samaria podcast. And
Beth, hope you're doing good.
Hey, Beth. And she just recently published Presence Matters with iDisciple Publishing. We really enjoyed working with Beth and her team on that project. Tell us a little bit about, your experience with Back2Back at Family.
Okay.
And then there's bigger decisions in your life that come from your engagement with Back2Back. But just give us a little bit of kind of how you first started to interact with them.
Yeah, so I signed up to go on a mission trip in, what was it, 2006? I was 37 years old.
Okay.
I had never been out of the country. This was the last year you could actually leave the country without a passport. You could actually use your driver's license and a birth certificate.
Oh, wow.
To go to Mexico. And so that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I saw things I had never seen before.
Wow.
I wouldn't say ashamed, but I was like, gosh, how did I miss all this?
Yeah.
Sheltered, isolated, insulated, whatever you want.
Privileged,
right? Privileged. And how did I miss all this? And I went down there and I saw, I remember there was a place called the Rio. It was really a squatters area next to the river that the government would let people build homes on, small things just to live. And there was this one afternoon, it was an afternoon women's Bible study, and Pastor Angel was doing the Bible study, and I'm hearing the gospel for the first time in a different language, and I'm in the back of the room, and I'm sobbing, just sobbing.
Yeah.
And so that was the first year I was on a back-to-back trip. I said, oh my goodness, I have to do something.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Was your trip back-to-back?
No.
No?
No, mine was World Vision and Family Christian.
What was the Family Christian one, though? Where'd you go?
We went to Guatemala.
Would that have been
Pray
back-to-back?
America.
Pray for America.
Pray
That's
America.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great place.
Because we did Goshen Valley, Pray for America, back-to-back. And then what was the Native American reservation?
I didn't do that one.
I cannot remember.
Anyway, we did that.
Yeah,
our team did that with family as well, but I can't remember who the ministry partner was. So, just as a bit of a side note, we went to Ethiopia together with Marianne, with World Vision,
that was
and Mesrach.
Yeah.
So you remember Marianne Osborne because she worked with Family Christian closely, and she's been on this podcast. Giving Company has also been to East Africa with Crisis Aid International. And I remember going, and dear friends of mine, Stan and Deb Mills, they're in Nashville. They asked me to meet with them at NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters Conference, which every other year is in Nashville, after that trip. And Stan Mills, if you're out there, hey man, this was a really cool conversation. But he looked at me and he said, David, I feel like everything's different. Since coming back. And I kind of said the same thing, and you alluded to it as well, which is your frame of reference is now so different about what you experience here in this country, maybe what you experience in the West, to some extent, in advanced developed countries versus what billions of people are experiencing outside that bubble. And it's hard to look at anything the same way again.
For sure. For sure.
Well, you must have developed a pretty good relationship with Back2Back, because I think you and Karen made a pretty big life decision with Back2Back involving the adoption of 3 girls that changed your life forever. Tell us about that.
I'll give you a little bit of backstory on that. So, 2006 was my first trip, and then I went again in 2007. In 2007, I met a young man that I began to mentor in one of the children's homes served by Back2Back. And that began this process for Karen and I to think about, what does it look like to have more kids in our home?
Wow. And you already had...
So I have two biological boys.
Yep.
I have 2 biological boys. And so in 2008, actually, this young man and his brother came to Michigan for the summer. And it sort of solidified this, hey...
We could do this.
Right? Yep. And so they came there for 6 weeks and went back. And so that fall, I think it was the fall of 2008, Beth Guckenberger reached out to Family Christian, the James Fund, and talked to a lady named Mary Jo and said, hey, do you know anybody that'd like to adopt 3 girls from Mexico? And she was quick to say the Bowles would. Well, so Karen and I began to entertain this idea of, my heart was in Monterey at the time from what I had seen.
Yep.
My wife had not experienced any of this.
Gotcha.
Right? So she had the experience with the 2 young men, but not necessarily like full-on adoption, really.
Yeah.
And so I was on a mission trip with Back2Back, leading a Family Christian team in March of 2009. I actually met the girls without them knowing what the goal was or what my intention was at that moment. And Karen and I were on the ground in February of 2010, working and actually meeting with the local social services to see what the possibility was. And we didn't come home till March of 2013.
Really?
It was a long time. Yeah, when we finally got the approvals, there was like 2 years we actually couldn't have any contact with the girls whatsoever.
Okay.
And lots of doubts in their minds. Is this real? Do they love us? You know, all sorts of things.
Got it. Okay.
So we actually got all our paperwork in order. We left in June of 2012. Had to come back to the States for some more paperwork. Had to go back to Monterey. I think it was almost the end of August. And then we were there till March. We were told this will take about 3 to 6 weeks. And it took 8 months.
Wow. And how was work during that time?
Well, fortunately, I worked for Family Christian, who really prioritized James 127.
Wow.
And so I was allowed to work from there.
Okay.
Karen stayed the whole time. And I would eventually go back and forth. Gotcha. There was one point, my oldest daughter had told the psychologist, hey, I'm not sure I want to do this. Why don't they just adopt my sisters and not me?
Wow.
And so that actually put things on hold for like 3 additional months.
Okay.
And so it was quite the challenge. But we made it home in March of 13.
March of 13. What prompted Beth to make that call?
Which
to family in 2008? Like, was it something about these 3 girls needing to get out of Mexico? Like, why being adopted in the U.S.? Why was that the answer? Do you know? Like what?
I mean, I know the circumstances.
Yeah.
And I'm only guessing that maybe the circumstances were prompting that. So
Gotcha.
there was a grandmother who was responsible for 3 girls.
Yeah.
At that time, there probably were 6, 8, and 10.
Okay.
If that. And she had taken custody of them after both of their parents had passed away and couldn't really take care of them. So she placed them in a children's home and really asked, is there another option for these girls? And I'm only assuming that that's probably what prompted Beth to reach out to Mary Jo.
Gotcha. Wow. So in your bio, you were on the Ohio Interagency Council on Youth as a parent representative with open quotations, lived experience, close quotations. Needless to say, you have significant lived experience with youth experiencing significant trauma.
Yep.
So I want to kind of couple these 2 observations together, which is at this point, our listeners are like, wow, this couple, Mike and Karen Bowles, stayed committed to adopting 3 sisters for several years, went and lived in Mexico, you know, for the majority of that time to help facilitate. And
we thought that was the hard part.
Yeah, right. So March of 2013, is that when you returned home? Like, celebration.
Yep.
You're out of Mexico. The 3 girls are with you. Hooray. Mike and Karen are spiritual heroes. They've been good Samaritans, and everything's going to work out great. Like, that's probably what most of our listeners are sort of feeling in their spirits right now.
And I think that's what most of the people that were rooting for us were feeling, like, oh, this is over.
Yeah.
And it had only just begun.
And so I meet you. I started with iDisciple in March of 2015. My guess is our first meeting was probably immediate, right? Because you were running the Family Christian program, so which was our only customer at the time. And here's my recollection, Mike. Most meetings, you would have to get up out of the meeting and take a phone call.
Yeah.
So that's kind of and I tell people, I even told people yesterday, like, Mike's ability to be dealing with what he was dealing with and get up out of a meeting and say, hey, I've got to take a phone call. I think in one case you said, hey, I've got a police officer. I have a police officer in my driveway.
Yeah.
And you would come back and you would be as productive in the meeting as you were before the phone call. We would go have dinner. You would be engaging. I just don't know that our listeners, or frankly, even me, being close to you, can really comprehend what the last 9+ years have been like. Give us a glimpse.
Thinking about where to start.
Yeah.
Right. I think we'll go back to 13 when we got home. We knew a little bit about trauma. We'd gone through foster care classes. We got whatever we had to get the girls home from a class perspective. But we had no idea what trauma was really going to do, not only what it did to our girls, what it was going to do to our family.
Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah.
And
are the boys still at home at this point?
Yes, they were still home. In fact, in a matter of months, my oldest would actually go off to the University of Alabama.
Okay.
One more time.
That's right.
Right. So he didn't live with the girls very long, but my second son did.
Okay.
So we knew of some trauma that had taken place with one of my daughters, but we had no idea with our youngest daughter what had taken place. In fact, we were only learning as it unfolded.
Wow.
And later, we actually got trauma certified.
Okay.
Went through lots of trauma training to really understand what was taking place. I think it helped put things in perspective, but still very, very difficult. And so our youngest not only went through trauma from an abuse standpoint when she was a child, but she went through neglect. So by the time she came along, her family had already, what I call, had gone bad.
Okay.
And so she didn't get a lot of attention in that process. And neglect is actually worse than abuse.
Really?
Of what it does.
Wow.
So she did not develop the right attachments. So it's really challenging. She will push you away if she gets too close, and then she'll pull you back. But
Gotcha.
then she'll push you away, something called reactive attachment disorder.
Okay. Wow. So
anyway, so that's 13.
Yeah.
I remember we first started seeing some of that from my youngest 2 weeks in. Immediately.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my goodness. So we lived 2 years in Michigan with them. We had, I know, at least 10 mental facility intakes. And here's this 10-year-old, 11-year-old needing to be placed in a facility, put on medication just to make it in our home.
Wow.
So it was January of 15. And I tell you, my wife was at her wit's end. I think the police had told us that, hey, if there's any more, we're just going to basically, they were going to take her from us.
Okay.
And so my wife's on the phone with Beth Guckerberger on a January night and crying, like, what do we do here? I say, give me the phone. So I said, Beth, if we move to Cincinnati, will we find more support? And Beth's a cheerleader. So I said, Beth, I need you to just tell me straight up.
Yeah.
She says, yes, of course you will.
Okay.
So that night, she sent me this list. She had written out a whole list. At the top of the list was Cincinnati Children's Hospital International Adoption Center. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's a place like this?
Yeah.
I don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
But there's a place like this.
Just seeing the words
there's a place,
on the paper, right? Yeah.
So in Michigan, all of our services were separate. So
gotcha.
My daughter's therapist was separate from her psychiatrist, separate from the social worker. Every time we had to go to the hospital and take her there, you wind up with a different social worker telling your story over and over and over again. And going to Cincinnati basically would put all of our services for our daughter under one umbrella.
Wow.
Which was great.
Yeah.
We didn't have to tell that story over and over again. So that was in January 15. In February, we had appointments at the International Adoption Center at Cincinnati Children's, and we moved in March.
Okay. Done deal.
I checked with my
family Christian as well. Let you move.
They let me move. They let me move. I commuted for 2 years back and forth before family closed on my own dime at that moment. But
wow.
I wanted to keep my family together.
Yeah.
We basically foreclosed on a house. We declared bankruptcy. Whatever we had to do to keep our family unit together. And so that was in March of 15.
Okay. Wow.
That's where we arrived in Cincinnati.
So, without getting too into the nitty gritty, I think you send out a monthly newsletter, quarterly newsletter.
Every couple months.
Every couple months, the Bulls family newsletter comes out. I get it. But I think you've probably counted up the number of police visits since the adoption.
Yeah. And so, often I hear in this industry that we have around orphan, vulnerable children, adoption.
Yeah.
The story is the child's, and I completely agree with that. At this point, my child's story is also my story.
Yeah.
And so I will try to wander through explaining what's taking place carefully, but concisely.
Yeah.
So in the last 10 years, we have had probably over 110 police visits
in
our
the
home.
Number was over 100, if I remember correctly.
My daughter's had over 40 mental facility intakes. She's done a residential stay, and it's been really, really challenging.
Wow.
In that process.
How would you? So your experience in Michigan and Cincinnati were different. This question probably isn't even fair, but like, how's the country doing helping families and kids of severe trauma?
Wow.
From your perspective?
Yeah.
Like, my guess would be we have a long way to go in this particular area.
When you even think about trauma itself and being aware of it, I mean, we really haven't known about the impact of trauma a long time. I'd say maybe 20 years, right? I'm sure some people did before, but really the study around the impact of trauma on children is probably 20 years old or less.
So it's a recent discipline.
We always felt like we were the trendsetter. We were the one that was going to blaze the trail.
Yeah.
And got to the place where we just accepted it. We were like, does anybody know what to do? Oftentimes, like in school, if we needed to get, how do we get help for our daughters in school? And we learned that the system itself will roll out the next piece that's cost the least amount of money. Instead of, and I'm sure there's a system and I can't fix the system, but instead of saying, oh, actually that one down, like 3 steps down, would actually help my daughter. Can I have that? Well, actually we have to do this one first. So that's been part of the system. It's really difficult to navigate. And once you're in the thick of it, we're in survival mode as well.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And to navigate, like, what paperwork do I have to fill out, and what appointments do I have to go to, and how do I get help from my daughter, and becomes a real challenge for families like ours.
Yeah, wow. So if you don't mind, give our listeners a glimpse of how the girls are doing today. Because I think there's been some real successes, right? As part of this journey. There's
definitely successes, and I'm gonna tell you all of it.
Yeah.
So my 3 daughters, my oldest daughter is 23. She went to one of the county career centers. She got her state license in cosmetology.
Nice.
She works at one of the top salons in Cincinnati doing nails. She's really good at it.
That's awesome.
My middle daughter also went to that career center, got her dental assistant certification. So she hasn't quite dove into that just yet.
Yeah.
She has a job interview today at IKEA.
Wow.
In Cincinnati. And then my youngest is just a challenge.
Yeah.
And she currently is living in a hotel that we've placed her in.
Okay.
We learned, this is actually something you don't know. We learned on September 8th, I got a call from my wife. Our office is actually like 300 yards from that house. I got a call from my wife, and my daughter was trying to bang down the door. My wife would not take her to the store.
Okay.
And so I sprinted home. I had walked to work that day. So Karen had already...
You did the 300 yards like
I really
Najee
fast.
Harris.
Really fast. And to be over 50, I was really proud of myself. It was really good.
Yeah.
And so I sprinted home. I actually made it there before the police got there. I saw the marks on the door. The door hinge was broken. And the frame was actually broken. And so the police were on their way. Well, in the middle of that, my daughter's friend had reached out to Karen and said, "Hey, don't let her leave. You're in danger." And so at that point, we learned of a plan that my daughter had to go into Cincinnati and get a gun.
Oh, gosh.
And come back and kill us.
Wow.
So at that point, my daughter did 40 days in a mental facility place. And when she turned 18, we actually became her legal guardians. To her dismay, because she wanted to make decisions on her own.
Sure.
She needed a guardian.
Yeah.
So at this point, we found ourselves trying to figure out, how do we fulfill our obligation as a guardian?
Right.
When we have our daughter who actually tends to harm us and tends to harm us. So we set out to figure out how do we relinquish guardianship in that process.
Okay.
We also learned that because she had already been declared incompetent, that we couldn't press charges against her in that process. So at the end of 40 days, we're really thankful the hospital held her. She has multiple county services that she can access. Actually, last Monday, we went to the court for the second time. While she was there was a doctor that had filled out an expert evaluation saying that guardianship could be terminated. And so the judge last Monday terminated guardianship.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so doesn't mean we don't want to do anything for her.
Right.
But it does mean we're not obligated to.
Yeah.
And she just had this hold on us in that process. And so anyway, it's been, and that's after an incredibly hard summer.
Right.
That we had. It's probably been the hardest year that we've had out of the 10 years.
Wow.
But we're hoping there's light.
Yeah. So a couple things come to my mind and my heart. I mean, I would think our listeners are reacting the same way I am, which is hearts are breaking for you and Karen, right? Like the Bowles family, as well as your youngest. And I want to talk about what you're doing with Back2Back now, because that's been pretty amazing, what you've been able to do there in a short period of time. But if you were to think about your and Karen's journey, what should other people take away from it? In other words, are there examples of where people surrounded you and did really good things to help? And were there examples where people weren't very helpful at all, to either you as a family or the girls or all of that?
I think families like ours, and I know that our family is probably on the extreme side and challenges, but bringing children, particularly older kids, into your home that come with lots of trauma is a big challenge.
Yeah.
And it often isolates a family. So we found ourselves, I would often kid with my boss and say, look, and be content with it, right? Sometimes I would say, look, if I had a theme song, it'd be Need to Breathe, The Outsiders.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes I felt like we had leprosy because to have us over to your home, our daughter was going to disturb it.
Yep.
And we couldn't have you over to our home either for her disturbing that as well.
Yeah.
So isolation comes, and I know it's out there for other families. And I would encourage listeners in general, if you see a family that's adopted any child, right, what you see on the surface is not what's taking place at home. And oftentimes we need someone outside of our trauma to speak into that.
Yeah.
So I tell you, a couple of years ago, I would say our marriage was probably almost over. It was so difficult. And it really wasn't about Karen and I.
Yeah.
It was about Karen couldn't last any longer in the environment that we were in. And so reached out for a little bit of help. I actually called a friend of mine, and I've known him for 30 years. He actually hired me at Joshua's Christian Stores all those years ago.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I need you to check on me every 2 weeks. Will you just call me? And he has. In fact, he sent me a Bible verse this morning, which was great. Yeah. But it's oftentimes people say, what do you need? And sometimes we just need people to invade our space and give us options.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we actually are so in crisis.
Right.
We don't know what we need and we can't see it. But if somebody can come alongside us and pull us to the side and actually give us options, but it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's painfully hard to sit and watch what we've been through.
Yeah.
And people have.
Yeah. So last question on this.
Yeah.
Where do you put your faith? How do you classify and describe your faith when you think back to fall of 2008 to, let's call it early winter of 2022, right? So 14 plus years.
Right.
Where's your faith been in kind of this whole journey and timeline?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have anything else but faith, right? I would probably say, and I don't know if I could even articulate some of it right now. Probably my views have changed a little bit. Probably things I thought were, oh, God does this for this reason, have probably now I go, God, I really don't know why you do this. I really don't know why this is allowed to happen.
What is the point?
I don't know what this is like. I tell my team often, I said, I'm a presuppositionalist. And so I presuppose that God is sovereign. Like, they're just absolutes for me, that he is still with me. Oftentimes, whether it feels that way or not, I know that's true. Beth would always say, to step back and say, what do we know to be true? Because emotions can get in your way, and fear can get in your way.
Sure, yeah.
And distraction, and loneliness, and isolation. And you just have to step back and, what do I know to be true? And step back and look at that.
Wow. That's pretty incredible. You and Karen and the family have been through quite a bit, and I'm so grateful. I know our listeners are as well, for you to share a little bit of what your story has been like. I want to pivot in the last few minutes, if you don't mind, that we have, and just talk about your career at Back2Back. I mean, you kind of started out like, hey, I'm going to go work here and I've got to raise my own funds. And now you're leading 2 teams. And like that's been a bright spot, right? In the last 5 years.
Yeah, I really enjoy what I do. I got to, being in retail for 25 years, at the end of that, you go, okay, what other skills do I have, right? Non-retail. And really what I learned, I had a lot of great leaders that led me, that poured into me, that taught me things that actually have ported over really well. Yeah. Data analytics. I say that I learned data analytics. I got my master's degree from Cliff Bartow when he was the CEO of Family Christian. Right.
He's a data.
He taught me a lot of things about how to look at data and analyze it. Yep. And so I got a chance to use that at Back2Back. Nice. And sort of say, hey, this is where we really are. Yeah. These are the opportunities we have. And then I love my team. I love pouring into people and coaching them and developing them. I know that they probably won't stay with us all forever. Sure. But wherever they go, I want them to be better in that process. And then like 2 months after COVID happened, I got a chance to move from development director to advancement director and take the marketing team. That's so great. Figure out, okay, where are we going? All of our mission teams had shut down, right? And which has really been our primary connection point. Right? Yeah, that's how people for engagement and donors, and so we embarked on that, and we're still trying to climb out of that a little bit and look for other ways to engage.
Well, for what it's worth, I remember the work that you did at Family, and there was a particular training video that you had put together, I think, for the store. What was the term for a Family Christian employee? They weren't called employees, right? What were they called? Teammates or?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I'm trying to remember what it was. I can't remember either. But
team member, maybe.
Like, it was one of the most eloquent, and I don't think you were using a script. I think you were in front of the camera and you were talking about, iDisciple as a product, what kind of experience you want to create for the customer in the store. Yeah. What's a way you can kind of differentiate yourself as a store associate. Like, it was one of the most well done training videos. That. And I remember going, this guy's really talented. Regardless of what happens with Christian retail, there's lots more for him to do. A couple more things. Yeah. How, for all of our listeners, I would encourage you to listen to the Beth Guckenberger podcast from, season 1, Dan, season 1 or 2. So. Just because she talks a lot about Back2Back and a lot more about trauma and those kinds of things. But if somebody wants to get involved with Back2Back, where can they go to kind of maybe learn more or understand more?
Yeah, you can learn more at the number 2, back. Back2Back.org. And find out all about what we do.
Awesome. And then as you maybe think about the next, you're still a young guy, what's next for Mike Bowles, and what other things do you maybe dream about or think about for your future?
Yeah, that's a broad question, right? And so my first comment when I was thinking about this was, I go back to Coach Saban, right, at Alabama.
Okay.
Okay, one more time. If I could book in this, right? But he says, "Be where your feet are."
Yeah,
and I think you know, I'm where I'm at. I'm doing good work. I'm excited about it.
Love it.
I really don't know what the future holds. My wife and I have just bought a house.
That's
after 7 years of bankruptcy. We came out of that. We bought a house. We moved to get out of the circumstance we're in now that our daughter's not living with us. And in fact, my wife this afternoon has a job interview.
Awesome.
To move. She's been in food services at Cincinnati Children's. She went back to school in September. She got her state certified nursing assistant. And so she has an interview this afternoon to be part of the surgical team, PCA, I think is for the patient care advocate.
Okay.
At Children's. I hope
awesome.
I'm sure she'll do great in an interview this afternoon.
Wow.
I have no idea. Yeah. I love pouring into my team.
You're doing some table group stuff. And Working
I'm
Genius with Lencioni.
I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan.
I am too.
I remember reading 5 Temptations of a CEO back in the late 90s. Actually, I listened to it.
Yeah.
And it probably saved my career.
Wow.
Just understanding the process and things I was doing. Was I trying to be everybody's friend, and how did I hold people accountable? But yeah, so in the middle of COVID, I'm listening to podcasts, doing all this kind of stuff, and the table group comes out with this new assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, a new assessment in the middle of COVID? Come on. How do you come up with something like this? So I reached out to a friend of mine and a lady on my team, and I said, hey, will you help me vet this?
That's awesome.
And see what this is. And so our team uses really 3 things. We use 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yep. His classic, right? Lencioni's classic book.
Yep. We use the Enneagram.
Yep.
For self-awareness and others' awareness.
That's good.
And we do Working Genius.
Nice.
And we've had a chance to do all of the office. We've done global training around the world for our leaders around the Working Genius, really to help them understand not only like, I know I'm called here and I know I'm on the right bus, but what seat do I fit in?
Yeah.
And why do I get so tired?
Right.
What wears me out?
Yeah.
How come I could do one thing all day long and another thing, I actually don't even want to do it?
Yeah. Very cool.
So,
well, I'm sure there's lots more in your future, and maybe one final thing, if you don't mind. Your journey's been pretty incredible. And, for somebody who wanted to go to seminary, winds up in Christian retail, gets exposed to Back2Back, adopts 3 sisters from Mexico with significant trauma in their backgrounds. You kind of walk this journey with Karen and those that surrounded you, Beth in the team, et cetera, Cincinnati Children's. This is a podcast that loves to highlight stories like yours. And it's amazing what you and Karen have done. If you look at the parable in Luke chapter 10, Dan and I talk about this every episode. Somebody is getting out of their comfort zone, right? To go understand and serve and love and overserve somebody who's not like themselves. I mean, that's the essence of the Good Samaritan parable. And people think it's about rescuing cats and changing tires and stuff. It's like, look, there's some real profound takeaways from Jesus's words in Luke chapter 10. What's maybe one little nugget of how to be a good Samaritan from the perspective of Mike Bowles and everything you've been through?
Wow. I think it is that piece of we're all living our own lives, right? That's one thing I've learned is that when I was looking for someone to help step in, others are struggling with their own stuff. And so I had to reframe my own expectations about what that is. And I probably had, and I know my wife has had, resentment from misplaced expectations.
Yeah.
And Todd Guckenberger, who's my boss at Back2Back, he actually says that misplaced expectations are premeditated resentment. And I've had to really step back and say, okay, what were my expectations? What were somebody else's expectations? They probably didn't line up. I could have been out of line for sure and misunderstood. But going in with anything else but like let God set those expectations. They're really His and not, we will be disappointed as soon as we set an expectation because things happen and things change. And the plan, well, as soon as the first punch is thrown, the plan is void.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Whew.
That was awesome.
Pretty good from an Alabama fan, huh? Man. So when I have to say, you know, I'm this shallow to our listeners, I'm sorry, but when you said the fall of 2008, Beth placed a call to the James 127 team at Family Christian. You know what happened in the fall of 2008.
That's when we called Nick Saban.
So in the fall of 2008, Dan, you have to remember, my wife and I are not from Atlanta. We're Chicagoans, and I'm a Big Ten kid from education. My sister and I went to Indiana. I got a graduate degree from Northwestern. We lived in Chicago. But Chicago's not a college sports town. It's a professional sports town. So we moved to Atlanta and we're like, oh, I guess you do this SEC thing. So let's pick a team. And we picked the Georgia Bulldogs, and the whole family gathers to watch the #1 Georgia Bulldogs at home play Alabama. Alabama's up 35-0 at half. And Rhonda and I looked at each other literally, and we were like, I think it's kind of miserable to be a Georgia Bulldog. like missed expectations. I hate to say it, super shallow version of your very wise comments there. But anyway, we've lived the bumpy up and down of being Georgia Bulldog fans, but we're all in. We have 2 kids, obviously, who are there now. And so it's been fun, but it's still not quite the top of the trees that maybe being an Alabama fan or an Ohio State fan might bring. So anyway, all that being said, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing a little bit. I mean, I know you were just the tip of the iceberg of everything that you and Karen have experienced. And speaking on behalf of Giving Company, of all our listeners, we are praying for you and cheering for you. And
appreciate that.
And in awe, literally, of what you and your family have done and accomplished. And I'm just sure there's blessing upon blessing awaiting you in the future.
I appreciate that, David.
Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, another episode for the books. Misguided. Sorry, say the quote one more time. That's what I want to leave everybody with again.
Todd's
one more time.
Yeah.
Todd's quote.
Misplaced expectations or premeditated resentment.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Well, and go to back2back.org for all of our listeners. If you want to get more involved with Back2Back and the work that Mike is doing and leading, it's an incredible organization. We love them to death. And thank you so much again, Mike, for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. That's it for today, everybody. This has been the Walking Through Samaria podcast with your host, David Hendrickson, and my co-host,
Dan Riveros.
We will talk to you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
See ya.
For more content like this, visit us at givingcompany.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Walking Through Samaria.